Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at Facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and TuneIn.com, where you can find us by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. Maybe that'll inspire Apple to promote us a little bit in the new year. You can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. You'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our Virtual Memories Show guests and is only available to supporters. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. All right, it looks like I've slipped back into semi-frantic, hectic, anxiety-laden mode with all sorts of day trips and overnight stuff coming up for work. On the plus side, I'm still ahead on the podcast by a couple of weeks, and I've got a really great slate of guests to record with in the next month or so, but it will get a little crazy since I have to get in a lot of reading and research for those shows, and I'm going to be spending a lot of time on train trips and hotel stays, and generally won't be at my most focused. But you guys don't want to hear about that. You want to hear about the aforementioned books, art, comics, and culture. I mean, I could do a whole series about the crazy stuff I do at my day job, but there's a non-disclosure agreement that sort of governs my life, an explicit one, but also the implicit NDA that makes discretion a valuable asset, which is all I can say about that. That takes us to this week's show. This week's guest is the cartoonist Lauren Weinstein. Or Weinstein. I don't think I asked her at the time. Lauren has a regular spot in the Village Voice, and that puts her in some pretty amazing company. That's a paper that ran work regularly from Jules Feiffer back in the 60s, and Lynda Barry and Ben Catcher and Matt Groening and Tom Tomorrow and Stan Mack and Ward Sutton, whom I met last year and didn't believe he was Ward Sutton because he looked a lot younger than Ward should be, and a whole lot of other great cartoonists. Her strip Normal Person runs there regularly, and it's NORMEL. I met Lauren and her husband, Tim Hodler, who works for the Comics Journal, a few times over the years at festivals, but see, the thing is, they look a lot younger than they are, so I always kind of dismiss them as young whippersnappers, and it turns out they're only a little bit younger than me, so now I hold them in pretty high esteem. With that hindsight, I realized Laura's actually a pretty impressive cartoonist, and she works generally in this kind of scratchy style, and she manages to integrate these intensely personal and overwhelmingly political ideas together without coming off as preachy, I guess. You should check out her Normal Person work. I mean, there's also a lot of laughs. I don't mean this all as being, horribly dreary autobiographical stuff about how terrible the current political era is. That said, one of her best works, I think, is this 5-part online comic she did called Carriers, which we'll talk about during the show, about the experience when she and her husband discovered that their unborn child might have the gene for cystic fibrosis. There are not a ton of laughs in that one, I admit, but it's a really, really amazing strip. But her comics can also be very, very funny, and she's got this amazing eye for the absurd details of life. So I was glad to get her on the show. And even better, she's based in northern New Jersey. I actually offered to go down to her place to record. But it turns out she's the mother of a 10-month-old child and was really happy to get the opportunity to get away for a little while and come up to the Virtual Memories mansion and record the show here. That said, there's one caveat related to that, which is she sat on the second chair in my downstairs library/office, and that squeaks a little when you pivot on it. Other than that, though, we were pretty much all good. Now, here's Lauren's bio. Lauren Weinstein's highly acclaimed comic strip, Normal Person, can be found in The Village Voice. Sometimes her work can be spotted in The New Yorker and The Guardian and The Paris Review. She has published 3 books, Girl Stories, Inside Viney Land, and Goddess of War. Currently, she's working on a teenage memoir tentatively entitled Calamity, to be published by Henry Holt, and a comic about motherhood for the publisher Youth in Decline. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Lauren Weinstein. When artists try and explain something to you that's form bending, but you can't visualize in the slightest what they're talking about. So don't do that, is what I'm saying. We may as well get rolling now, as long as we started with, trying to keep you within formalistic bounds.
Okay.
Tell me about your comics upbringing first.
My comics upbringing, I have vivid memories of sitting on my father's lap and reading the Sunday paper together. And then there weren't really comics for girls. Yeah. And so I read Mad Magazine. I had a subscription to Mad Magazine. I watched Looney Tunes a lot, and which aren't comics, but maybe qualify.
It's a gateway.
Yeah. And then I read Life in Hell when I was in high school, and that changed my life. And
was there a particular one that bent you? Or just the gestalt?
I liked the one that's like a map. The maps of the character's house.
Not Akbar and Jeff.
No.
The
bunny guy.
Yeah. We can't remember them now because now it's canceled. It's all in the past. But,
right.
Yeah, I forget his name.
But anyway, Boingo? No, I don't know. Anyway,
Mac Groening is the highest net worth person I've ever body slammed to the ground, though. That was yet another Brooklyn Comics story. We just turned a corner, both of us, and wham! And this guy's falling to the ground. I'm lunging to catch him and realizing you're Mac Groening. Oh my God! You're worth far more than I'll ever be. But yeah.
But he's he's such a nice guy, though.
About that, he was fine.
He was polite.
Yeah.
I thought for a second that was like a thing that you guys had planned or something, like a
match. No, it would have been, we had a wrestling match at a festival. Well, we talked about that once, Tom Spurgeon and I, when there was a cartoonist who wanted to beat my ass about 20 years ago because of a review I wrote in the Comics Journal. And he pointed out that even in my pencil neck geek way that I could probably take almost anyone in comics, at least on the guy side, except for Mac White, he said, because Mac was the sort of Texan who actually carried a knife in his boot and would be real trouble in a fight. But not that we should have Cartoonist Fight Club by any means. Anyway, back to your comics upbringing.
Yeah, sure. No. When I was in high school, I was in crew, and for a little while I could beat guys at arm wrestling. Nice. And that was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
I felt like you could really become a cartoonist with these hypertrophied arms. So back to the comics that I liked in high school. So I liked, and I liked The Far Side, and I liked Monty Python. So basically, I was a 13-year-old nerdy boy, but in a girl suit or something. And I finally met all these nerdy boys that could quote Monty Python, and I realized that was a terrible thing to do. Yeah. The long, I don't know what you're talking about.
Quotes of Monty Python. And I was like, I memorized the scene too, but I don't perform it. Yeah. But I loved all that stuff. And I didn't make the connection of ever wanting to be a cartoonist. I never read superhero comics. And I really wanted to be a painter. But then I guess in college I read Art School Confidential.
Dan Clowes strip?
Yeah, the Dan Clowes strip. It was like...
Did you know someone who did the tampon in a teacup thing for an installation or not?
I did.
You were your own stereotype. That's so great.
I did something with tampons. It was like some kind of
statement. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, I don't know. No, I don't want to belittle it. It was just.
Listen, there's a stack of notebooks in that window of things I wrote when I was 20, 21 years old. So yeah, feel free to belittle. That's fine.
I just, you're in art school and you think you're the first person to ever discover that you could do something with tampons. It was, and I remember the little teeny eye roll that my sculpture teacher gave me, but you
were paying.
I was a kid, yeah. but I remember reading that and like rolling around on my studio floor with laughter and feeling like there's never been anything more insightful about the art school experience. And I didn't discover people like Linda Barry and Debbie Dreschler and Phoebe Gleckner until after I got out of art school. And then I realized that there was this whole other alternative history of comics that you really had to dig for.
Mm-hmm. This would have been the 90s?
Yeah. It was the late 90s, I guess. 97 was when I graduated. And so, like, right around there, I was starting to... There's
an internet, but there's not internet culture the same way about this stuff.
The internet yet in 1997. And so, actually... I was kind of interested in comics, and then in college I met Dan Nadel, and I met Tim Hodler, who is now my husband. And Dan had like a serious comics collection, and he showed me a lot of stuff, like Crumb, and I loved the way Crumb drew. And I also loved the really messed up content of his comics. I mean, I just thought, So he showed me all that stuff. And then Tim started a comics magazine called Bug, and he was my first publisher and later my husband. But I made a stupid little comic about being about having an identity crisis and being totally depressed and going to Red Lobster and just at least feeling like I wasn't breaded.
Yeah.
And that was it. And that wasn't it, actually.
It got worse? I'm sorry.
No, everything. I mean, I had like a complete mental breakdown in college, but making that comic felt really good. It felt like a natural thing to do. And I didn't have any kind of world. There wasn't a world that I was attaching myself to. It's interesting though, because like I loved Philip Guston, that painter. Philip Guston made me, and then like Alice Neal and Paula Modersohn Becker, these fine artists that kind of like gateway cartoonist, inspiring for those reasons. Like when I went to art school, you weren't supposed to do any work about narrative. That was very uncool. And so looking at Guston, who had just started to touch the surface of narrative, like he realized that you couldn't be a pure abstract artist. You had to bring some narrative elements in, that made total sense to me. And I guess my mind is more concrete. Like I always want to tell a story, and I couldn't do that in art school. So I went back to... You were asking me about what comics I liked.
Oh, that's okay. This whole thing's, this is no conversation work. You've listened to some of the episodes. Yeah. I have no formal way of organizing this stuff. But yeah, the act of becoming a cartoonist then.
Yeah. Well, so it was definitely... I still, in my heart, want to be a painter, I think. But I keep going back to making comics. I have 2 gigantic canvases in my studio right now that are 15 years old, just waiting One day.
I have been returning to old stories of mine. And as I open the files, I see they're created in like 1998 and we're never finished. So don't feel like you're the only neurotic Jew in northern New Jersey who can't get their art done. You've always got me. That's important. But yeah, painting is an aspiration at this point, or is it still I'd love to get back to it, but
I just try and put elements of expressive painting into my comics. That's sort of where I'm at right now with it. And every once in a while I'll get stuck, and I have a series of paintings that I've been working on for the past 20 years, and I'll take them out and add like a layer to them and then put them back.
It's going to confuse art historians when they do like the dating of this stuff and see, I don't understand. How could this take her 40 years?
Yeah, I'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny because I recently, there was like a local craft show in Maplewood, and I was like, I want to display these. And then like my husband looked at them and he's like, these should not go in the craft show. I don't know what you're thinking. Like, you should save these and they will go in a gallery at some point, like a real gallery. And I was like, oh yeah.
You have faith in me. You're my husband. That's good.
So that was nice.
Yeah. So becoming a professional?
Oh, so how did I become a professional?
Are you a professional?
I don't know if I...
Would you consider comics your profession or vocation?
Yes, I definitely would. It's definitely something that I've spent most of my time doing, and it's my beloved thing that satisfies me more than anything else.
Yeah.
Except for maybe being a parent, but actually more than being a parent.
We'll get into that too.
But
trust me, I've got a whole line of questions about it.
But how did I become a professional? I've stumbled into every single thing I've done in my whole life.
Career by attrition is my model for this stuff. But yeah, people kept dying or quitting, usually dying ahead of me. And so I would just keep moving along that way. But it's good. People didn't die in front of you. So that's something.
Yeah, that is good. I got my first cartooning job when my friend from college, Samantha, started working for The Stranger in Seattle, and they needed cartoonists. And I'd done just a couple, and it was one of those fake it till you make it things. I was a waitress in Connecticut, and in my breaks I would go scribble like a landscape, and then at the end of the summer I had these beautiful landscape pen and ink drawings, and I put them all together, and I wrote places you could get killed in the Litchfield Hills, Connecticut, with just little arrows of where you might die. And I just put it, and they published it in the paper. They actually published it in the paper, and then they wanted me to do more strips. So every week I would fax a strip into The Stranger from New York, and I was on the same page as like Chris Ware and Tony Millionaire and basically all my heroes at that point. And it was the best comics boot camp you ever could imagine, because I would get my ass kicked every week. I'd get the page mailed back to me, the print page. Yeah. And I would look at what everybody else did and what I did, and I was like, oh God, how do I get better?
I don't mean it as a knock or anything, but was there a degree of, well, thank God nobody's going to see my thing. They're going to be looking at Chris Ware and Tony's thing. So did you feel like you were sneaking into that page in that way?
Maybe a little bit. But then people would write to me. Like, it wasn't just, I actually, it's such a strange thing not having the internet at that point, because you don't know what's happening. And in some ways you're not monitoring it in the same way. Like, you can figure out how many likes you've gotten for things and how much traffic, but there was nothing like that. So in some ways it was much more freeing. I could just do whatever I wanted to do. And they kept running my comics, which was amazing. Mm-hmm. So I guess that underdog status always made me feel like less constraints, which was good. And then I guess the sincerest form of flattery was I was doing a series of strips of The Stranger called Little Laurie Sprinkles and Mr. Weenus. And it was about these two little doughboy characters traveling interdimensionally through time and space. And somebody spray painted them on the side of a wall. And I got really excited about that.
That's great. Has anyone ever shown up with a tattoo of any of your?
I haven't seen seen that yet.
Because your stuff isn't that, it's not like seeing people with, Hopi and Maggie tattoo. That's a little more, defined, I guess.
Right. I remember Tony Millionaire, which would publish whole strips of just people's tattoos of his work.
Yeah. Were you tattooed at all or not?
I'm not tattooed,
because I know the Jewish thing will also come up as we talk, but I wasn't sure if that was a stricture or just a fear of needles or something. But,
I am not.
Or fear of commitment. That's,
I am not tattooed. But it's a fear of commitment more than anything. I can't imagine one thing on my body that would be resonant enough forever for it to make any sense for me.
Except, a Dan Clowes figure just, venting angrily or something that's, which again, won't wear up when you're in your 60s.
Yeah, that's not, Although getting that in the small of my back would be pretty good.
The Lloyd Llewellyn tramp stamp, that'd be great. That's going into early Dan Clowes. Sorry, that's.
No, I know that.
I would figure. But, do you have a first time you got to meet your idols? And did you have any sort of freak out moments around anyone who you idolized?
I met Crumb, which was amazing, under an amazing circumstance. An amazing circumstance where and Aileen Kaminsky Crumb, and by that time I was just as big a fan of hers as I was of his. Like her work is amazing, and she's kind of underappreciated, I think, because she kind of started a whole other branch of comics. But anyway, I met them at my friend John Keene's house. He had become friends. John, I don't know if you know who John Keene is. He's a friend of Chris Ware's that I met him at a Max Fish show when I was in my early 20s, and he was this nerdy guy dressed all in like Devo clothes in the middle, standing in the back of the bar, and I threw myself at him.
As one does. Yeah. Did he have a flower pot head to a hat?
Almost. Okay. I mean, he wasn't saying anything. He was wearing like horn-rimmed glasses, and I just gave him my number. Am I nuts? I was crazy, but I gave him my number, and then it turned out that he
was not in Devo, and
no, he was right. What was I? No, but it turned out that actually he had he knew all these cartooning people that I didn't know that at the time, but Crumb had come to his house. He was John was a big ragtime piano guy, and he was playing ragtime piano for Crumb, and I showed him my comics, and he smiled and laughed, and I mean,
that's validation.
Yeah.
I would take it as validation if I were you. And knowing how badly a woman meeting Crumb, encounter could go, I'd take that as a good sign.
It was great. It was totally amazing.
Let me ask you, actually, the digital versus, coming up the way you did, as you mentioned, being in The Stranger.
Yeah.
In a essentially pre-internet environment. Mm-hmm. Do you think that helped? Do you, if you would come up a few years later when things were more digital only and everything was geared around likes and not likes, do you feel that had an impact on how you developed?
Well, actually, I did come up during the internet, and at the same time I was doing this underground stuff for this newspaper, I was doing work for this website called girl.com.
With a U, right?
Yes, with a U. Girl, GI was a pornography site, but GURL was this very influential teenage girls comics website, and their comics had just started to be on America Online, and so I made a comic called Am I Fat? And I got 10,000 emails from teenage girls asking me if they thought that if I thought that they were fat.
Okay.
And and it was it was like being at the end of this raw nerve. Like all these people were emailing me out of the blue. So I guess at that point there weren't things like likes and dislikes, but there was.
You did have email feedback.
Yeah, there was this instant conversation and instant feedback. And that freaked me out, actually. I didn't want to be anybody's self-help guru.
Yeah.
I didn't I was working for Girl, and I kind of knew that there would be topics that would touch a nerve, and I could do comics about those topics, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to tell stories and do weird stuff, and I didn't necessarily want to do these sort of identity-driven, self-helpy comics that I think are now very popular too. I mean, and I get why they help people, they really do. But I think when you think about your work that way, it is kind of limiting.
Or that you kind of fall into the feedback loop.
Yeah. Exactly. Like you're thinking about what's going to touch a nerve and how. And I think that it really can limit people's way that they can tell a story. It's less about storytelling and more about sort of goosing the audience.
Yeah.
And I think that's not something not really genuine about that.
Yeah. How do you compensate for that?
Sometimes.
See, I just do it by having interviews with people that nobody knows.
Sometimes I try and make things that people will talk about. I do. Yeah. But then I always try and make it more specific and less like the 1,000 think pieces that I've read on the internet so far. But it's hard not to read those and think, I mean, that's how the internet has changed everything. It really forces a voice, and it's really important to just take a step back and think about how you process it. But it's hard to separate yourself from the hordes too. Sometimes, like, you're like, is this my opinion or is it everybody else's opinion?
Yeah. Or are you trying to find some angle that nobody else has tackled yet, in a certain inauthenticity, just to be the person who makes that particular take?
Yeah.
Not you, I mean, but just people in general.
Yeah.
You see that with conversations, just latching on to like the weirdest possible angle to something just so they can be
right. But and in that way, it also flames out too. Like, you can have debate 1,000 different ideas, some kind of group think, and then it's gone. So I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
Well, talk about your current gig. I mean, you're primarily drawing for the Village Voice.
Yeah.
How do you balance, we'll say, political versus personal cartooning in that venue? I'm
trying to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that those are actually my strongest comics, when I try and bring the political home. So I got this Village Voice gig like before Trump was elected. And so I thought that I would just be doing maybe lighthearted, weird stuff like I did for The Stranger. And then I felt like the work needed to get political because the whole world kind of fell apart in the course of me getting this job, which was unbelievable. An unbelievable stroke of luck for me. It's just a way to process this stuff. I mean, it was an unbelievable. So they were looking for a cartoonist, and actually Tom Spurgeon, thank you, Tom, mentioned my name to the editors there, and they were, and he told me about it, and without really thinking, I jumped on the idea. I was like, because I thought of how successful for me creatively doing a weekly strip was back in The Stranger, and that was many years ago. That was like,
almost 20.
Yeah, almost 20 years ago. So I remember doing the best work of my life because I was forced to do it.
In terms of a deadline? Or,
yeah. I had to show up every week and just think of something. And I felt like I needed something like that because I was sort of floundering I was doing a lot of some comics journalism stuff and some shorter pieces, and then working on this horrible graphic novel. Not horrible. It's going to be really good.
I've got questions about that one too.
I've been working on the same graphic novel for,
Yeah. When I was doing research, I would keep seeing interviews with you where you would say, this is the thing I'm working on. It's going to be done in the next year. And I would notice the dates on them were, like 3, 4, 5 years apart. But anyway, we won't go into that. Let's talk about the good stuff with the Village Voice.
Anyway, so I was like, you know what? Nothing's changing with this graphic novel. I don't know if I'll ever finish it. But I do know that being prompted to do something every week is something I can do. I think I'm kind of good at that. So, and whenever I've worked to deadline, I think I do okay work. I'm good at it. So I decided that I was right for this job, basically.
Barged in.
Well, I didn't barge in. I wrote them. So I knew that I was under consideration for this job. The Village Voice was trying everything that they could, but they were introducing comics, and they had an editor who was really excited about just trying stuff, and or an art editor. So I wrote them a letter that was like, hey. I know I'm under consideration for this job, and this is why I'd be good for it. And I've never done anything like that before in my life. And they got right back to me, and they were like, okay, that's great. Let's do it. Let's do this. And then it just started up, but also I was pregnant and, just kind of decided I would take on all this work while I was pregnant, knowing that that's actually a really hard thing to do. And I was just going to do it. So I've done that. I've worked straight through. I think I've taken like 2 weeks off straight through, and in the course of doing all this, also the world has gone crazy. So,
but at least it gives you material.
Yeah, it does. And I thought that too. I was like, I can always kind of fall back on this stuff.
Yeah, it's never a down week. Although all the Tom Tomorrow and all those guys are like, we'd really trade some serenity and calmness for all the material we have. So
exactly. So anyway, I got this job, and then in the course of having the Village Voice job, their print died. They don't have a print version, and they're still going online. And I actually think a lot of their coverage of Puerto Rico has been very good, and their film stuff is great. So I'm happy to see that they still are alive, and in some ways moving from print to digital gives me more flexibility too in terms of
I was going to ask, how's that transition, how's it affected what you're doing for them?
Well, I know that I could do something longer, or not really shorter, but longer. I can always do something longer, and so it actually gives me it's a little unnerving, because I could do either this little 4-panel box, or I could do a longer piece like I did last week. It was a 3-page comic about how kids kind of absorb what's going on around them politically, and when to tell them what to think and when to just let them have their own thoughts. And that was something that was going to take 3 pages, so I actually skipped a week trying to put this thing together. So it's very touch and go, because I really don't have that much babysitting at this point, and I'm constantly in the little openings in the night, and whenever I can, going back to my work. So there's always this sort of race to try and get something done, and it's made me completely schizophrenic.
Oh, good. I was wondering about the nights. That was really worrying me this time. Do you draw on paper, or you're all digital?
On paper for the most part. Okay. A couple weeks ago, I tried. Every once in a while, I try and do something all digital. I really like connecting with a page. I like to color digitally, but
I don't know if you check her on Instagram. I follow Roz Chast, and she got the Apple Pencil and iPad, and it's so weird seeing a Roz Chast drawing that isn't
I've been seeing those
sketchy
too.
and vibrating with neurosis,
right?
Which maybe they can build a filter in that makes the pencil do that for her. But
you're drawing on glass. It's very smooth, and it doesn't quite have the same. I really like the touch of the page, the way that the nib drags into the page, and I like all the mistakes that happen when you do that too. But there are many mistakes that happen when you have a baby that's trying to reach for your ink, and that is, I'm I have tattooed my child almost by accident, but now it's impossible. She's 10 months walking and talking. And so I really can't have ink anywhere near her, and also anywhere near myself when I'm super sleep deprived.
Yeah. You're doing okay today though, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Ink free.
Thank God.
I don't have any on this.
Except for that one smut. Oh, you don't see it. Never mind. Do you prefer seeing work in print or on screen?
I like them both. I think they both have different. I think print is maybe the gold standard, but I really like the conversation that happens when you have
an online thing. I actually really, really enjoy getting feedback and then people talking about ideas.
I think that there's something to be said for that. Like I did a comic a couple years ago called Carriers, about my husband and I had both tested positive for this genetic, the cystic fibrosis gene. So there was like, there's a really big chance that we both, that are 25% chance that our kid was going to have cystic fibrosis. So it was a really heavy comic, and it was released over 5 days for this website called Nautilus. And it went through all of the different, there was what do you do when you're waiting for this information to come back? There was this idea of why does this gene exist?
Yeah, you had that section of the, why would this be passed on, within these populations? Yeah.
Right. So it went through all these different things, and it got a tremendous amount of conversation going, and not all of it was complimentary. A lot of it was, how dare you even think about abortion? And then a lot of it was from people that actually had cystic fibrosis talking about their lives. And I felt like that was fascinating, amazing. So the conversation that generated was civil for the most part. And that's great. I think that's the best case scenario for a comic like that, where it really generates that kind of. So I like that about the web stuff, but I also think that books have a real, people become friends with books.
Yeah. Although that strip has a very vertical, it's a scrolling strip, and I wonder about making a strip in that sort of format, knowing that it just can't be reproduced in print.
It was reproduced in print.
How did that work?
It looks awful.
Yeah.
I worked so hard to try and make it work, but it doesn't really work. Because so much of it has to do with scrolling down and down and down. And I've noticed that actually with a lot of comics that I've read that have first been on the internet and then they're put into books, they seem kind of light on the page, or they're strangely formatted. So I find that maddening. Yeah. I don't know how to.
I talked about with Evan Dorkin and Sarah Dyer in Columbus last year. They have an online strip. I forget who the artist is, called Kala Cthulhu. And it's done vertically, but they figured out how to get it in print and make it work that way. But, it's something that's inherently in a different form.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was thinking reading Carriers. I'm like, this is great. I have no idea how you would do this outside of having a big accordion book. And
publishers have gotten in touch with me about reprinting that too in a book. I think I'll just have to redo the whole thing. I'll have to
that's a subject matter you'd love to revisit, I'm sure.
Well, actually, that comic was really interesting because they just thought on Nautilus, they thought it was going to run on just like a blog. And I don't think they really fact checked it in the way that, and I caught a couple errors after the fact, and they were changed on the website. But I think that comic actually, if I revisited it, there are a couple more factual things that I need to sort of add in to the comic about genetic testing. It's the world has updated since that comic has.
We should note that you're. Spoiler alert, the child she was carrying did not actually end up having the gene for cystic fibrosis.
Yeah, so, and the new one doesn't either, so we were really lucky.
Yeah. But it was a harrowing read. I mean, it's trying to put yourself into, as a reader, putting yourself into the mindset of two parents who have to take this into consideration. Yeah. I also found myself thinking, because you had the wonderful moment with the genetic counselor calling and telling you it's good news, and how that counselor had a run of bad news to tell people. And I wonder what that person's life is like. So you might do a sequel just following a genetic counselor around telling people awful things. That's, because I always think of the supporting character. That's, my flaw. Although let me ask, fiction versus the memoir / semi-fictionalized memoir. Mm-hmm. Do you think in terms of purely fictional storytelling at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mimi Pond said it on your podcast a couple weeks ago. That I like the term autobiofictionalography. I think that'll
work too.
That Linda Berry, that's her word for it. There is a lot of condensing. And to make something a good story, you almost always have to lie and change things around. And if you can get to the emotional underpinnings of it, then that's good. But a lot of times I'll change things around. Yeah.
But have you thought of doing totally fictive? I mean, you had the Goddess of War starting thing, but have you looked at doing
I have. I would love to do more fictional stuff. I just need time to do it. It's funny because this book that I've been working on forever and ever, which is
I didn't bring it up, you did.
I know, because it's like nuclear war. You know how you have nuclear war in the back of your mind, and you're like, oh, it's terrible. That's my book.
That's your, which has the appropriate title of Calamity. That's good.
I know, it's still called Calamity, and I just this year, I've been talking to my editor again, but now the ball's in. I re-outlined the entire book. At one point it was up to 600 pages, and now I've like scrapped a lot of it, and a lot of it was just like not really knowing what it was about, and things about my mom. There's a lot of stuff about my mom in this book. Of course, everybody's always got. But I love my mom. I've
got the Jules Feiffer Kill Your Mother book over in the corner there. You ever read Feiffer's autobiography or memoir?
No, I haven't.
There's a great passage very early on when he's working in Will Eisner's studio. Mm-hmm. And he's a kid. He's like 15 years old. Mm-hmm. And he's got this terrible stomach thing, and he's contorted and in pain. And doctor can't figure out what's wrong with him. He's in the bullpen, just drawing away or helping and assisting. And they all notice he's in this terrible pain. This one intellectual Jew of a cartoonist listens to him for a few minutes, and he says, well, it's obvious. You hate your mother, and that's what's causing this. And Feiffer freaks out at him. I do not. How could you possibly say that I love my mother? How could you? And eventually, after a back and forth, he finally says, fine, I hate my mother. And then the pain just goes away instantly. And then Jules had holy crap, he was right. But anyway, I'm not saying you hate your mother by any means, but you are Jewish. So,
yes.
So it's problematic.
My mother, well, I think that my mother's situation is fascinating, especially. So I've had this book deal for long enough that I've become a parent within that whole time frame. And it's completely changed my idea of what my mom went through, because my mom is like a second generation feminist, where she is, she's basically trying to have it all at all points. And she's like the world's best do-gooder Yenta lady. She basically works to help poor people. And so when I was 14, she got in a car accident. She hadn't slept for a week, and she was trying to release this thing called the Poor People's Budget, and she was driving to a press conference, and she fell asleep at the wheel and flipped over on the road and broke every single bone in her foot. So that's what the second book is about. How, as a kid, really wanting to do my own artistic thing and seeing this woman who's trying to navigate her career and her work as a mom, and trying to get those, trying to figure out how to do all this stuff at once, how to tell that story. and then becoming a mother myself, it's just been, I don't know, every time I work on it, it just becomes so big, and it's like piercing this wound over and over again. It's hard to, but then I always feel like I get interesting things out of it. It's just, I'm afraid of doing it.
Been to therapy? No, I'm not asking, facetiously. Is that
I have been to therapy a long time ago.
But not since becoming a parent.
Not since becoming a parent. I actually called up a therapist a couple weeks ago thinking that I wanted to go to therapy. And she asked me to rattle off everything that I was doing. And she's like, you don't need therapy. You need childcare. Yeah.
You just need to organize your time better. And then,
You need childcare. And actually that conversation was very therapeutic.
Oh, trust me. And that's all. I had a session with Carol Tyler on this show that was essentially a therapy session for her. I joked I was going to charge her when we finished. That it was, well, this is very nice. Unfortunately, our time is up now. And, just.
But I think maybe that's why a lot of people get into making comics, because it's a way to process things, to put it down on the page, and then it has its own life, and then you're able to kind of wrap it up and move away from it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an interesting thing.
Outside of destroying your time management, etc., how did parenthood change what you do? And is the difference between parenthood and motherhood? Do those differ in ways that I should be more sensitive to?
So, okay, motherhood is completely, I think maybe there is a difference. It's more intense as a mother. I hate to say it, but I just think it is. I mean, right now I'm literally attached to my child. Like I pumped breast milk right before I got here, and I can't be away forever right now, or else I would explode.
I'll keep an eye on the timer here. I'm making sure we're close, but yeah. Okay.
But it's a real thing, it's like, and so let's see, it's affected my work because it actually kind of helped me transform into, I think, a real artist.
Yeah. How so?
First of all, it throws down the gauntlet. It's like all your free time could be taken up by being a parent. Like you could do this, but you don't want to, do you? You want to keep drawing. And so everything I could do to continue to work was just laid bare. Basically, when I had a kid, I had to just keep working. I had to figure out how to keep working. And so that process of figuring things out makes you a better artist because I was just less precious about my work. Mm-hmm. I used to be sort of a perfectionist about work. I really wanted to be somebody like Chris Ware. It's never going to be, like that's not. But it's okay. They're like, you don't have to be Chris Ware.
So I wanted to be Philip Roth and Thomas Pynchon. There's a reason why I never got into writing, because I never got over that.
Yeah. So it forces you to come out with stuff. And the stuff that I've done since being a parent has kind of struck a nerve with people and with myself. Like, I think it was the most genuine, some of the most genuine stuff I've ever done. It also, I felt like when I first started doing it, was very unexplored territory for cartoonists. And I still feel like that's true. So it's this endless subject matter, sort of, except there are problems with that too. But
in terms of using your kids as material?
Yeah, in terms of using my kids as material. Like, for example, last week I was showing my comic to my older daughter, my 8-year-old, and she did not want me to show her doing something. And I had to edit the end out of my comic and change it because she didn't want me to and it's not embarrassing. It's totally...
But it's an 8-year-old's...
Yeah. Yeah,
Kyla Roberts has talked about that a little in terms of, I'm kind of using the kid for material, but
right. And so I think there maybe there's a part of motherhood that's all about you, and then there's a part that's all about your kid, and then trying to balance those things is difficult. But anyway, being a mother just threw down the gauntlet for me. It forced me to understand that I was an artist, and this is like a war that I'm fighting on a daily basis just to make stuff. And so in that way, it's helped me a lot, but it's also kind of hindered me because it takes away, you have to, there's this real catch-22 with being an artist, a mother, and trying to make comics about your kids, which is that to make comics and to think, you have to be away from your kid. Mm-hmm. And when you're away from your kid, you're not being a parent. Yeah. So there's this circular thing that's going on, like how much are you in it and how much are you observing it? So I think that's fascinating. But I also feel like there need to be more stories about parenthood in the world, because when I was younger, I felt like I didn't see anything like that except for maybe Carol Tyler's work and Aileen Kaminsky Crumb's. And more people need to see that you don't just disappear. Right. And if there were more stories like that out there, I feel like that didn't feel marginalized in the mommy blog world.
That's what I wonder. Is there much in the way we talked about, falling into audience gratification online? Is there also the, oh, that's nice, it's a mommy strip, and that gets consigned to, that ghetto?
I think it does. And you have to fight for it to be recognized as important. Yeah. So I feel like I'm very engaged in that fight right now. And, but also linking it back to politics, how, like, I really feel like if there were more stories about marginalized people in the world, that this world would be a lot less insane. So I don't know, that's the type of work I'm trying to do right now.
What are you better at as a cartoonist?
Writing or drawing? Is that what you?
Either way, what have you gotten better at? What do you look at? I'm sorry. I mean, what over 20 plus years? Yeah, where have you? What do you look at and say, wow, I could not have done this in 2000?
Working fast. I've gotten better at working fast, and not second guessing myself. I've gotten better at that. And I've gotten better, I think, overall at storytelling. I think I know how to do a good 4-panel strip that's going to have a lot of ideas in it that'll make people think about things. And I like that. That's exciting to me. It's really exciting.
Are there things that are tougher, or things that you just, outside of the time constraint thing now, because, kids. Yeah. Are there aspects of this that are more difficult for you?
Longer stories are vexing to me, just because of I need to hold on to them with my brain and remember what I had already done. And especially when you've been working on something for 15 years, going back to my book and being like, oh, that looks familiar because I've already drawn the whole thing. So that's something. And really, I guess the bigger thing is that I wish I had more books out, because I've been showing publishers, I have definite interest from publishers, and I've been showing stuff and they're like, you have like 3 books of material that you could put out. You just, it's so. Is it
an issue with it not being thematically?
Yeah, just like each book, like a normal person book will come out, but I need to, that's my comic strip for the Village Voice. But I need to get at least 100 strips. So that's just like a thing. And then a collection of motherhood stuff will come out, but I still need to do a bunch of stuff for that. And then there's my other book. So I feel like it's just sorting all that stuff out. That's the hardest thing for me right now. And also sometimes I'll get into a rut. Like 2 weeks ago, Well, that is something I've gotten better at too.
Yeah.
Like 2 weeks ago, I was in a rut. I think I did like 3 not so great, or at least I felt that way, not so great comics for the Village Voice. And then I did a good one last week. I felt like it was good.
Yeah. Oh no, trust me. I have the same thing sometimes. There's that one didn't work. Yeah. If it's 2 or 3 in a row, it's like, am I losing it? Am I kind of, and then you hit a home run and you realize it's all the other person and not you.
Yeah.
So that way you can blame the other person if it doesn't go well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But you've also been a teacher.
Yeah.
In comics.
I know. That's when you said, it's not you thing. I was like, teaching.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. Like, what did you learn about comics in the act of becoming a teacher?
What have I learned about comics?
What did you realize you didn't know the first time you got up in front of a class?
I realized I didn't know anything about perspective, and I still don't.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. But I don't mean it in a bad way. But yeah, it's.
But I don't care. Perspective is a conceit, just like anything else. But I let's see. What did I learn from teaching? I've learned so much from teaching.
Were there things that fed back into your cartooning, or was it more outward facing in terms of how you explain?
Yeah. Teaching is different than making comics. It's a different exercise. It's you're learning how to impart information to people, which at this point for me is just being a presence and an editor, and I'm trying to cut down on the power play between students and teachers. So I want them to be invested in their own work. And I don't want to use the traditional power structure of teaching. I don't know exactly. I mean, I'm the teacher, so obviously, but I find the longer you teach, the more you can do that, because there's a whole backlog of information that you know. But I want students to become really good editors and be intellectually curious. And so I'll show them, as many different comics as I can, and I'll edit their work, and then they get better. And I'm kind of a harsh critic too. Sometimes. I don't know. Sometimes I'm not, though, because I don't feel like that would help their work.
No, but the ability to learn, or the ability to read the student and figure out what the best approach is something you learn.
Yeah.
I think.
Definitely.
There are non-comics aspects,
I like being in the presence of somebody who's trying to learn how to get better and helping them to do that. And that's my favorite thing about teaching. Right now, I actually have too many people in my class, and it's killing me every week. I have 19 kids in a studio class. Yeah. Some of them don't speak English. A lot of them have mental health issues, and I'm just trying to make them, do their best work, or not to make them, just to provide a place for them to do that. And I actually think that since Trump has been elected, everybody's going through different kinds of trauma, and it's completely screwed up the classroom. There's so many more people under so many different kinds of stresses right now, and I don't know exactly what to do about it. So it's that to me is really sad, actually. You asked me like I feel like I'm learning a lot of stuff right now, and I don't quite know how to process it actually about teaching. Because I used to, I've got lesson plans. I know how to teach certain basic fundamental ideas about comics, but if I'm going to set somebody on a life path of where you're not making that much money, you're graduating with lots of student debt. What real skills do I need to impart on people to make sure that they can walk around in this world? I was teaching this class and I, a couple of years ago, I got a Tumblr expert in to teach people how to represent themselves on social media. And now, of course, I would never get a Tumblr expert in school. Like, Tumblr's dead and there are no experts, so I try and keep things relevant, but even while I do that, I want somebody to be confident of their work, intellectually curious, and nimble enough to jump from different platforms, I guess. And not just ape somebody's style, So those are all things that I'm trying to do as a teacher.
Are you pretty good at identifying the good ones at the beginning of a semester? Or do you always get surprised by, holy crap, I did not think that kid was going to be this engaged?
I always get surprised.
Good. I take that as a good sign.
I never, in fact, the more I do that thing where I scan the class and I peg people, the more I get screwed up. And I've realized that as a teacher too. Like I realize that you'll have like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody with amazing drawing skills that really cannot panel to panel tell a story at all. Like, do not know how panels relate, and also get hung up on, they did this gorgeous page, how can they do another page, and then have total mental breakdowns, So getting people to think beyond their amazing skill and really, like, I cannot tell who's talking right now. Those very basic things are things I keep having to tell, like the Rembrandts in my class. And then there are other students that just draw stick figures, but they can tell a story really easily. And a lot of times those students are the ones that surprise me the most, that really begin to tell interesting stories. My big thing is, sometimes there are students that have so many extenuating circumstances, and when do you fight for those students and try, like I had a student last year who was working as a parking attendant, and she literally would pull an all-nighter in the middle of the Bronx every single weekend to make ends meet, and it really affected her work. She was like exhausted. So what do you say to a student like that?
Yeah, you don't want to be too critical and
yeah, or maybe you should, like, does that person need to graduate with thousands of dollars of debt? So those are the questions I keep asking. Those are really serious moral questions I'm actually having about teaching comics right now. Mm-hmm. I don't.
I think if you heard my last Mimi Pond one, either the CXC one or the one-on-one we did, mm-hmm. She's told everybody straight up, you have to marry a sugar daddy to go into cartooning. And that's, I know it's an exaggeration, but when she said that at CXC, that apparently had some impact on some of the art students who were in the room at the time, who were just, really? Oh my God, I'm going to quit and go to business school.
See, I don't know if you need to do that, because a lot of my students are kind of making money on Patreon, and like there's, with this whole, like,
well, there's 20-year-olds money, and then there's
right, exactly, yeah, right. Yeah. To really do it, it's a different story.
Actually, speaking of, what would Professor Weinstein have told 19-year-old Lauren if she were a student in her class?
Just to keep going. You know what? Actually, the professor that I always wished that I'd met would have been Gary Panner. Because there is somebody who's kind of gone between the fine art world and the comics world. And I really thought that there were these divisions between these two worlds. Yeah. And he's just kind of gone every way and not put barriers down in what he was trying to do. So that's the teacher I would want to be now and wish that I'd had then. But actually, if you had told me in college that I was going to be a cartoonist, I would have laughed. I would have said, no, I'm a famous painter and performance artist like Laura Anderson.
Now, you did have a singing / performing career, right? Not career. You sang and performed. That's yeah.
I mean, we were a band that was around in New York for about 10 years, and we recorded albums and toured all over the country, and was at South by Southwest, and opened up at PS1 for Psychic TV. That was cool. But I was like a different human being. That was an amazing experience. So I would dress up almost like as a drag queen of a more feminine version of myself, or stereotypically, I would wear all red, and I would wear a big blonde wig, and I'd scream my guts out and roll around on stage, and then I would take my wig off and talk. Like, I remember talking to somebody with my whole outfit on, and being like, just a second, taking my outfit off, and then continuing the conversation with a person, and they would have no idea who I was. And in some ways, it helped me channel spirits, human, other. There's some. I was given license to do lots of amazing things, like dump a ice bucket down somebody's back in the middle of a show, and that was amazing. And I was just listening to Flaming Fire the other day and thinking, wow, I'm so lucky that my 20s were documented in this way. Yeah. That I can look back and say, that's an amazing, that all this, we played with this guy, Brian Duan, who's a really good musician. And he said, the thing about Flaming Fire is just to keep your eye off the ball. Because often terrible things would happen during shows. Like once Patrick, my lead singer guy, he screamed so hard that he winded himself and fell off the stage. And I was backing up him and screaming, and I was like, what do I do right now? Do I continue, or do we stop and see if he's okay? And do I pick up his cell phone that fell off? Is that in character? No. I'm just going to, so.
Did you have a name, by the way? Were you a different person?
No. I mean, I was just the blonde lady from Flaming Fire.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you created a whole identity.
I developed a whole identity for myself, which is that I saw Patrick, who's very fire and brimstone kind of recitations. Like, we were actually a Christian rock band, but I didn't find this out until we were playing on WFMU, and he announced that we were a Christian rock band. Yeah. So it's just stuff like that. Again, keeping your eye off the ball. But we were in Reno. We were all in a hot tub together, and I was thinking that was my alter ego of this. I was like a stewardess or something, and I lived in Reno, and I met all these guys, and I just toured the country with them, which is about as far from my real identity as you can get. So it was really fun. And often I would tell stories towards the end of our time when Patrick hired a drummer on Craigslist, and then the drummer walked off stage in the middle of a concert that we had in LA during Halloween, I think it was. And so then we were like, we can still do this without a drummer. We don't need a drummer. In fact, we don't need the rest of the band. It's just going to be Patrick and I, and we're going to tour around with a sampler. And at that point, and we did it. We actually did it. Flaming Fire was a band where we decided that we didn't need instruments in the beginning, because people that played instruments were such tuning snobs. And then we saw a videotape of ourselves, and we were like, we need instruments. We need these musician types to make this band work, because we're just awful.
Well, it's good to recognize that. So.
But I don't think, I think there was something really special that we had going on. And
any issues with your kids seeing this stuff down the line?
No, I love it. I love it. I love.
This was mommy. Don't end up quite like this, but find your own way.
No, she could totally end up like I did, because I didn't. It was never a pathway down the wrong. It might have been like financially. I think I paid I made negative $848 being in Flaming Fire.
Yeah.
But it was fun. There's nothing like playing music with a bunch of people and everybody in the same situation kind of enjoying themselves. and the link that you have, the immediate link that you have with the audience, you don't really get that with comics.
Had you had a performing thing when you were a kid?
I was
live performing
in The King and I in 8th grade, and it totally scarred me because the teacher made me sing a little bit too high. But I'd always, I was in 8th grade, I was totally bullied, and then I was cast as the love slave to the king, which is just a terrible, terrible thing to be. But so I always wanted to do more performance stuff, but I didn't do anything like that until I met my friend Patrick at the Mermaid Parade.
And it just
through
changed
Dame
your life.
Darcy.
Nice. Another cartooning influence, I assume?
Yeah, I love
especially with the sort of scratchy thing, I was glad you mentioned Debbie Dreschler earlier, because that's I want to say like the missing link. Like when I look at your stuff and try to figure out, not that you're aping someone, but like who the influences are. And I remember those couple of Summer of Love comics of hers, and that's boom. That kind of does it. So. Women in comics?
Women in comics.
Dealing with
women.
Is it easier now than
women are making the best comics right now.
Yeah. You have spoken.
I mean, like Emil Ferris. Is that it? Like amazing.
Yeah, it's Emil. Yeah.
And Gabrielle Bell and Carol Tyler. I mean, every year, just Jillian Tamaki, Eleanor Davis. The list goes on and on. They're doing the best comics. Is there anything more to be said than that?
Our work here is done.
Uli Lust. I think that that comics are cheap. They're a bunch of cartoon. Anybody can make comics because all you need is like a scanner and a piece of paper. And there are enough comics now by women that are really huge that there are no women that have to sort of look like I did when I was a kid.
Yeah, to wonder what's out there.
Yeah. So that's really an exciting thing. I saw that in teaching where there are a lot of women that started taking my classes that were just all reading the same manga, or young women, kids, high school students. They're all reading the same manga, and that was like a whole generation. But now people have read so many different types of things. So I don't know, it's an exciting time to work as a woman. But I do think, like I did the Goddess of War, and a lot of people just scratched their heads. They were like, what is this? And now I think there are a lot of more things like that. But there is a certain kind of comic that women are supposed to do. And
still the coming of age memoir-ish sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Or mom stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And that to me is limiting. I think there's so many more types of work that people can do. So I think that's one issue. It's still the marginalization of women. But then I don't know, I don't know if I believe that actually.
We'll say in recent years this was the case, but do you feel it certainly has changed over 20 years?
Yeah.
That there's more range, and you're not the same set of expectations, I suppose.
Yeah.
As being a cartoonist back then.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with the neck injury or neck surgery?
Yeah. So I, for 3 years, I thought I had really bad carpal tunnel problems, and I kept doing physical therapy and getting, but I was having tingling and numbness and also pain in my neck. And I thought for a long time that, and it kept getting worse. And then there was always just sort of like digging pain in my neck, and didn't matter what I did. It was always there, and it kept getting worse and worse. And as a parent, it's really, really difficult because there's this whole thing where you're not really paying attention to your whole body anyway, because you're, running around after your kid. And I just remember having her on my 8-year-old now on my lap and having just tremendous pain. And something was wrong. Even just when I would try to meditate and I would just feel this pain. It was never going away. And so, I also started to get tingling and numbness even down into my legs. And I thought I had MS because MS runs in, my mom's side of the family. And I was really freaking out about it. Then I finally got an MRI, and it turned out that I have a freakishly small spinal neck canal, just my way my body's built, and I slipped 2 discs, and lots of people have that. People slip discs all the time, but you can just kind of work it out. But these discs were poking into my spinal canal and basically impinging my nerves. And so I got 3 different doctors and a bunch of other opinions, and basically everybody said I needed surgery. And as somebody who draws for a living, and it's like my passion, the idea if they screwed up, I'd be paralyzed. I would. Well,
even if you're not a cartoonist, I think paralysis sucks. I'm going to go with that, but
totally sucks.
But especially if you're a cartoonist.
But just right. But I kept bringing it back to I won't be able to draw more than anything else, and so I was so scared. I scheduled and canceled the surgery twice, and then I met this amazing doctor, Dr. Chanlin Rumprunt, Dr. Chan.
God, there's something short.
And he was so calm, explained everything so perfectly, and he does 20 of these a day or something like that. But what they did was open up my neck, go in, take out 2 discs, and put cadaver bones, and then bracket them together with a metal bracket, titanium, and then sew me back up again. This was 2 or 3 years ago now, and I actually felt immediate recovery. It was literally like a miracle. In the recovery room, I was on all sorts of drugs, but I felt suddenly like I had superpowers. I could feel, they literally unblocked whatever was blocking it. I had more range and feeling in my hands right there that I asked for a pen in the recovery room and just started drawing all the nurses, and they stole that drawing from me, which is fine.
Sons of bitches.
But I was elated. You don't think that surgery, especially with this, I'm a big fan of, yoga-ing it out or something, but this changed my life in this really, really fundamental way. And I'm so glad I did it. I mean, I haven't had any pain or, hand problems since, but actually it was also good because, I got lots of, tips on how to treat my body right, in the whole process of getting physical therapy.
There was a guide from Creota Woodberg also, who's a past guest of the show, because that's how I understand the world now, just in terms of people I sit down with microphones with. But she's been adamant about you have to do these sorts of exercises if you're going to be a cartoonist.
And her book is fantastic. She's coming out with a longer book about the whole thing, and I've read it, and it's amazing.
Cool.
And it's something that I actually really think students need to learn about too, because I had so many bad habits, like grasping my pen really tightly and things like that I know that I need to kind of step off of right now.
The number of older cartoonists we know who are kind of hunched and curled, we realize that's years of avoiding their families. I mean, years of working on comics. And,
exactly. Yeah. So I know to stop and take a deep breath. And it was funny because I saw Carol Tyler. She had all this tape wrapped around her brushes and nibs and stuff. And I was like, kindred spirit.
Jewishness? Cultural as opposed to practicing. That's like me. We have the neuroses without any of the afterlife. So,
right. I'm definitely very culturally Jewish. Like I can't shake it. So then there it is. I think the idea of learning a lot of things and is a part of being Jewish.
The people of the book vibe, that's
right.
Or the people of the comic book, whatever.
But there's also a long tradition of Jewish cartoonists. So I feel like I'm right in there with all those people. So like Roz Chast or Harvey Kurtzman. Mm-hmm. But I think, I don't know, it's just a part of me. I don't have anything to say about it except that it's there.
Do you contrast it, though, with having a Goyish husband? Is that
Oh, yeah.
Do you look and say, well, that's who I could have been if I was born in the Midwest?
We like to complain. Okay, all of my Jewishness can be... I like to complain a lot, and he doesn't understand why people complain. Like, that's just part of my process of absorbing things in the world. And... like his mom has arthritis, and when she gets off the couch, she says, "Jiminy Christmas," and my mom just like swears a lot.
As punctuation. That's what we do. I've been pretty good so far because I'm afraid your kids might listen to this episode someday, but generally, we curse all the time.
Yeah. And so that's kind of another cultural difference. And so, that's something that, we're coming to terms with. And like, what is a Jewish education for my daughter? Like cooking stuff that's Jewish. But maybe also she should know about these things that she'll end up kvetching about. I don't know.
They need training. They need background and training in this stuff. Last question. New York versus New Jersey. And I'm just going to leave it out there without an actual question.
So I lived in New York for 15 years. And then we moved because we needed room for Tim's books. And also we lived above an auto repair place. And so our kids' room would smell like gasoline. So we decided to move to New Jersey. And I like it. But first of all, I feel like moving from New York to New Jersey, you realize what a facade New York is. It's just this big capitalist thing. And you think that your coffee house is like an authentic place, but it's really just the flavor of the month. And as soon as you leave and then you come back, it's like a totally different place that never loved you. But then you go back and you're like, I love those clogs that everybody's wearing. So I think
you get to be a tourist in somewhere that you used to be familiar.
Yeah. And so I miss being a part of that. I also love gardening. I've taken up gardening. I really enjoy that. But really Maplewood, New Jersey is like Park Slope on steroids. It's just everybody with their hyper attentive parenting skills, and their liberal arts degrees that they're using solely to parent their children, in this very beautiful town. So I like it, but it can feel a little claustrophobic, and I get really stir crazy in the winter. I think that's really the main
reason you came up here this morning. That's
yes, yeah. I think I wrote to you, anything to get out of my house.
And that was my whole thing. I was like, well, she's in New Jersey. I can just go down and record with her there. It's like, no, I'm coming to your place instead. So, more power, but I know it's going to be time that you have to get back to your kids soon, like you mentioned with the time fuse that you've got. So,
right.
Lauren, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memory Show.
That was great. Thanks.
And that was Lauren Weinstein. Her website is laurenweinstein.com, and that's LaurenWeinstein.com. It's got links to her comics, both the Village Voice work and her other strips, as well as a store with her mini comics and prints, and a link out to her blog and her Twitter feed. Oh, she tweets as Weinstein, and that's VINESHTEIN. Now, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Lauren, so, who you reading? And if you want to hear her answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memory Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. The newest episode of that one just went up a few weeks ago, and it features new material from Shannon Wheeler, Barry Blitt, Martin Rosen, Nicholas Delbanco, Eshkol Nevo, Paul Gravett, Eddie Portnoy, Vanda Kreft, and Cullen Murphy, all of whom answer my deceptively simple question, so, who are you reading? Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. And there are all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, the occasional patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my new secret project, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, we recorded this episode at my house, so I didn't have to go anywhere, buy any coffee, even didn't buy any pie. It was kind of nice as those things go. But still, if you want to help defray some of the cost of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or just toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Noah Van Sciver, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Lescamella, Joe Caruso, Paul Karasik, and Michael Janizik for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with animation historian Jerry Beck. Until then, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and tunein.com just by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.